Yeah. So the way that a lot of commercial beekeepers that I've met monitor for mites in the hive is using this thing they call an alcohol wash. So it's not so much a mesh floor and looking at a sticky board. It's more just taking a sample of bees, unfortunately killing them by putting them in a cup of alcohol or white spirit or something, and then swirling them around and looking at the mites. Randy Oliver uses this homemade plastic cup thing. I've bought this thing, which are freely available and good. But there's a video about to play, and if you can try it, the sound's not great, so just turn your volume up and we'll see if you can hear it. I hope you can, but it's very short. It's about 3 minutes, but it shows how to do an alcohol wash.
Hi, I'm going to show you how to do an alcohol wash the quick way. First thing I'd get would be a Rubbermaid dish tub, because the Rubbermaid tub exactly fits the curve of the stainless steel measuring cup. And the measuring cup I recommend is the Half Cup Good Cook brand. Good Cook brand, sold by Ace Hardware. It's a skinnier, taller cup, so it makes a more accurate sample of mites. Then you can look at my website for making the mite wash cup right here, and the marker. And we're going to open the hive up. And you don't need to go to the brood nest at all. What you need to do is there's very little difference in the mite count between the bees on honey frames and the bees on the brood nest. You have much less chance of killing the queen if you take the sample from a frame next to the brood nest, but not an actual brood frame. So I'm going to look over here to the edge of the brood nest. Now that's a brood frame, so I'm going to go over one more. I'm going to look for a frame that's got some bee bread on it. This frame, because of bee bread, will be covered with nurse bees. And now I'm going to separate the bees by age behaviorally. I'll tip the frame like this at an angle, so all the bees go into the tub. That's exactly the right amount of bees in this tub. If I were to get too many bees, I would just scoop some out, put them back in there until you have about this many. Now we're going to separate the bees behaviorally by letting the old bees fly off, leaving just the younger bees. And they'll all spread out like this. You can use your finger right now, they're not going to sting you at all. Make sure the queen's not there. Then bounce them down to one corner, put them under the cup like this, level them off just dead level and into the cup like that. And there we go, into the cup. The rest of the bees can be put back into the hive. Tap the bees off the lid, put the cover on, put my marker on, and now if I go somewhere else with this, I don't get mixed up. What I'm going to do now is do the wash. What I want to do is, this one needs a new lid. Jiggle just enough that the bees at the bottom are moving. The bees have to tumble at the bottom. If they don't move at the bottom, the mice get hung up on them. Now you should not have this kind of leaking, so I need a new lid on this one, which I'll replace. And spin around. For just field purposes, 30 seconds is fine. If you're going to do it for scientific data, you want to wash for a full minute. Again, I normally don't have this kind of leakage. Time for a new lid. Okay, we're going to break, come back, 30 seconds. Okay, so now we're good on here. Like, go over to here. It's a wide mouth mason jar. Slowly pick the bees up so I don't stir the mites up. And drop them in here. Now I can take the regular strainer. I just pour the alcohol forward, watching right here to make sure that no mites come forward. They just stay right at the bottom. I pour it out until I've only got a 1/4 inch left. And then I jiggle it to spread them out. Then you can look down and you can count the mites easily. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 mites in that count. After I've got my count, I'll write that down. You swirl this around, rinse out the cup with a little more alcohol, dump it out. Now here's the trick. So you don't damage these cups, always put this cup back in here and then you can toss out the bees. You refill your cup right up here again to the next line, snap the lid on. We go back here, we write down the count here, take this back, and this can move to the next hive. I don't know how many seconds that was. That tells you how long it takes to do an alcohol wash.
Right. So I don't know if you could hear much of that, but he had a leaky he had a leaky thing, but he had 17 mites in that sample, which is very high. Um, but anyway, this is his website, and in this area here, you can download this mite, the Varroa mite model that he's spent a long time developing. And in fact, one of the people who helped him with this was Steve Martin from Salford University. He was struggling with a particular thing, and it was a conversation with Steve Martin that enabled him to figure out a particular um, thing that was making it not quite work. So it's just a model. So obviously every hive's different, but it's good to be able to play around with the model just to see, what if this, what if that, and it can help us manage our colonies. So I'm now going to do a dangerously risky thing and show you a spreadsheet. So this is the, if you download it, this is what you'll get. And what we've got here is the light orange is the adult bees over time. So obviously that's midsummer, loads of bees. And this is the sealed brood, which is where the mites are most, well, often, the majority of the mites are often in there. There's all sorts of stuff going on. I won't show you. This thing is huge and it's full of loads of mumbo jumbo, but we don't really need all that. We just really need a few simple things. So the blue line will be the mite wash. So he showed you how to do a mite wash, and that will be helpful. You'll see how that works. And then in this yellow area here, you can add your mite treatments and see what the impact is. So in this green area, you've got a couple of inputs, and one of them is colony type, and that's D for default. And on this tab here, you've got different colony types, but actually the default works quite well for our bees because it's just a fairly typical kind of temperate climate beehive, but you can modify these things. So if you want to get really clever, you can start fiddling around with how many frames of brood you have at different times and how many bees and what have you. But I found that this default one is pretty good. So basically you just put a D in there and you're sorted. So if you started off the year with 0 mites, which is probably never going to happen, then this is what it would look like. Nothing to report. If you put in here, you put in how many mites you start with. So let's just say at the 1st of January, you had 5 mites in your hive, which is, considering you've probably got 12,000 to 16,000 bees, 5 mites is low. It would be nice to have 5 mites, but if you did, and you didn't do anything, this is what will happen. So the population picks up as the brood picks up, and they live because it's only starting with 5, and we've got none drifting in. It's not a problem. But if you could just play with this, so if I put it up to 6, it's a bit worse, and then if I put it up to 7, I think that's when they die. Yeah. So if you haven't really got much room for maneuver here, because if 6 mites your hive just about lives, and at 7 they die, and this is without treatment, and this is a type of bee that's probably not hugely resistant to Varroa, and I know some people have got them that may be better, but it just illustrates how you've got to be careful. Even if to have 7 mites at the beginning of the year is low. But also there's another thing here, which is the Mite Immigration. And he talks about here, you should put a number in that's applicable to you. A 0 would mean that you're pretty well on an isolated island with no other beekeepers, and that's not realistic. I tend to use one, which means it's a mite managed apiary, but it could go up to 2 or 3 if there's loads of beekeepers around you, and maybe some people aren't treating, or some people have left their beehives and don't look after them anymore, you know. But if you just put a 1 in there, which is just a default normal managed apiary, then what this shows is that towards the autumn, if you can see the blue numbers, mites are drifting in. So you haven't just got to worry about how many mites did I start with, it's also how many are going to drift in from other colonies. And what I normally use him to start with is something like 40. But what you can do, if you remember, his mite wash was 17. So what you can do with this, if you did a mite wash and you had, and let's say you did it on in August, 1st of August, say, you'd have to fiddle this model by changing the number of bees at the start to get to 17. So it's going to be something like, well, that's 19, so 105. Okay, so he's for his hive, that if his hive was of this type, for him to have 17 mites in his alcohol wash on the 1st of August, this would be the profile. And it's almost too late by then. I mean, basically, if you were to treat them straight away, I think it might even be too late. So that's what you can do is you can tailor this. So if you do a mite wash, you can fiddle the starting number to get it to match your colony. And then there are treatments. So here is the different treatments. So that's amitraz, that's apigard, that's max, the formic acid. You've got the 1 strip or the 2. You've got hopguard, sugar powder, all sorts of stuff, oxalic acid. So let's say you start with 40 mites and then you treat them towards the end of August. And what you do is, in this yellow box, you use the percentage that he says here. So if you were to use apigard, he says use 90%. So I'm going to put 90 in there. And you can see what happens. The number of mites immediately falls. You got up to about 3,000, and then you treat them with apigard, mites drop, and your colony doesn't die. But what happens here is that you're ending up with 459 mites. You started with 40, and then you treated them. I'm assuming that I take my honey supers off maybe around sometime in August, and then treat them straight away. But I'm still going to end up with a significant number of mites in my colony at the end of the year. And if I were then to use that 459 as the starting point for the following year, you can see how it's a problem. So what this model is telling me is, not only do I need to do my apigard after I've taken the honey off, but also if I do an oxalic treatment in the winter when they're broodless, and he's saying use 80 to 95. So I'm going to use that because I know it gets me back to the starting point. So if this is a typical year for me, assuming I start with about 40 odd mites, I can get all the way through to the honey's off, treat them straight away after the honey's off, treat them again in December, and it's sustainable and it works. But you can do different things. So what if you had you were a bit worried about your colony and you did a mite count, and it turns out that you have got one of these that looks like this. You're not going to be able to get to this point and save the colony. You need to treat them earlier. And it's a problem because if you've got honey on your hives, there aren't many options. It's basically formic acid, but you can if you look at here, two formic acid strips, he says 17 to 90%. So okay, I do a mite count, I do an alcohol wash, and I find I've got 9 or something about here. If I give them a blast, formic acid, it gets me back on track. They're still gonna struggle. That just gets me back to where I was before. I'll probably still have to do my Apigard, and I'll probably still have to do my oxalic acid. But it's good to know, isn't it? If you do a mite count in the summer and you compare it to this model, it'll give you an early warning of what's going to happen. I won't go on about this too long, sorry, but it just shows you how useful it is. There is one other thing that I think is really interesting, which is an artificial brood break. And that's almost what happens when they swarm as well. When the bees swarm, you're going to have a brood break, and obviously that's going to affect the mites. So over on this tab, there's a brood break, and there's an experiment that I'm actually going to be doing this year, which involves caging the queen. You cage the queen for a certain period, and until they're broodless, and then treat them with oxalic acid. So what you would do in the chart here is you have to pick you put a bee in for 2 periods when you're doing your brood break, and what that does here, you can see the number of mites is dropped because of this brood break. And then if you follow it up with an oxalic acid treatment when they're broodless, you can see how effective that is. So enough of that spreadsheet, but I mean it's just